we're getting asked less and less for big A Agile, at least as the first question from teams. I find it interesting, though, that even with that as the case, often people come in with a question about tooling or help me do this, make this happen. And actually, when you dig under the hood, the answers are the same people and process advice that we've been delivering as Agile coaches for years now. I find a lot of teams are using an organic mess of made up stuff, and then they wonder why it's not kind of working for them. And like desperately hoping that slapping a board on top of what they were doing before will somehow bring some magic sauce over things. And of course it doesn't. And they end up learning the same lessons that people have kind of codified in frameworks like Scrum or methods like Kanban. Yeah, I mean, but you're meant to be polite with it in case the revolution comes and the
That's what
robots
everyone
hold the
says.
ground. So you should always say please and thank you when you're addressing.
Awesome. Okay, so you mentioned that you're stepping away from the Agile branding, and a lot of teams are maybe stepping away from Agile in general. I'd love to hear your thoughts on why that might be.
Yeah, I really like people who've been putting up the quote around rumors of my death may have been greatly exaggerated with Agile, but it's definitely true that we're getting asked less and less for big A Agile, at least as the first question from teams. I find it interesting, though, that even with that as the case, often people come in with a question about tooling or help me do this, make this happen. And actually, when you dig under the hood, the answers are the same people and process advice that we've been delivering as Agile coaches for years now. It's just that people don't want the answer to be agility. They want something else under the hood. But it's the same advice when you come back to it. It's all about getting people to work together effectively, right?
So do you find a lot of teams using an alternative approach, like just Kanban or some other methodology?
I find a lot of teams are using an organic mess of made up stuff, and then they wonder why it's not kind of working for them. And like desperately hoping that slapping a board on top of what they were doing before will somehow bring some magic sauce over things. And of course it doesn't. And they end up learning the same lessons that people have kind of codified in frameworks like Scrum or methods like Kanban.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I come mostly from like an IT background and very operations heavy. Sounds like you come from maybe a development background and maybe something a little bit more focused towards like the development side and agile side of things. I'd love to hear a little bit about your background and kind of how you got into Atlassian and what you were doing before that.
Yeah, sort of not originally. My background's art and design, so I went to art college in the UK. For any fans of pulp, I went to St Martin's College where they study sculpture and what have you in the eponymous kind of karaoke hit. And I, I guess coming from a design background, iteration and prototyping and diverse thought and things were my background. I joined my current employer, Accenture, essentially wanting to escape a little bit from that like cycle of things where in the creative industries often I feel like as an individual you don't feel that valued, and I was just sick of like chasing people who were seemed surprised that they had to pay for me, and they were like, surely you could just work for the exposure, and it's like, no, I need to pay my rent and those things. So I joined Accenture as a kind of a businessy corporate rebellion, and then like most areas, I guess I just found there was loads of lovely people doing interesting work, and I ended up working in the creative industries in the UK, but for my company. And I guess you're right in that a lot of my initial projects were about delivering new digital products, exciting kind of things. Um, Although I think more and more I'm actually excited by the space that you've described coming from, and that sort of like getting the value out of things and helping people use stuff and keep it live and iterate it continually. I think that's where a lot of the exciting things come. And one of my projects in the UK, we were heavily Kanban based and delivering huge amounts of incremental benefits for live service delivery in investment companies. And I found it really exciting how much you can get out of that like steady state, teams helping people, adding to things rather than everything being a big project or a program. Because I've seen so many big projects and programs where you seem to beaver away for ages, and sometimes things work, sometimes things don't. Often they don't work quite how you expect. Whereas if you've got something there being used, teams helping their customers, even if you just add like plus 2% to their effectiveness, that's a huge gain for most companies. So, bit of a mix.
Yeah, yeah. What kind of teams do you typically work with? Is it enterprise scale or very small teams?
So it's often within large enterprise, but I think guess the interesting thing is that it always comes down to a small team of people ultimately when you kind of dig through. And sometimes that's at the bottom and they're making a component or a product or something, or it might be like a portfolio team who are sat there. And so I find it interesting that you often get down to sort of 5 or 10 humans, depending on where you're looking at, who need help in a different way at any point in time.
Yeah, yeah, I feel like it's so different going from enterprise to, a small team. The requirements may be similar, but the way that you approach the project, the way that you may implement stuff, and some of the way that the processes and workflows are within those teams can be widely different. With enterprise, there's so much standardization, there's so much continuity between projects, whereas with a small team, there may only be one project in total. So it's kind of a different approach that you would take compared to like a small versus enterprise team. And we've kind of had the pleasure of working with both. Both have like their unique things and their upsides and downsides. Is there anything that you've preferred like working with maybe a larger organization, or do you prefer smaller teams?
It's an interesting one. I find with smaller teams, sometimes you have the benefit of being able to just roll with it and kind of go for trying something and get things in. Um, I guess the flip side with the larger organizations is that once you've found something that's exciting or interesting, your potential to scale and do something big is really there for obvious reasons. Technology has always been a way to disrupt that, right? Because you can be an exciting startup and make something and it can scale rapidly. But I guess the nature of my role, where I'm often helping people do things across teams, means that being in that big context is nice. And I guess that's why I'm still in consulting, because it's often in a large organization and I like helping tens or hundreds of people and seeing how we can improve their jobs. So I quite like the enterprise context because of that one. And it's interesting comparing like private sector and public sector things. Ultimately, large bunches of humans, when you get together, there's always interesting inefficiencies and politics and problems people working together. And so seeing that repeated in lots of different industries and contexts, but ultimately with similar patterns, I found enjoyable.
Yeah, yeah, I kind of noticed pretty much the same exact thing that you just described. You're also very active in like the Atlassian community, and I think you do a lot of in-person events too, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Yeah,
What are
yeah.
those? What does this typically look like? Because I've actually never been to like other than the team events, an in-person event that's Atlassian focused.
Yeah, and it was a big sort of ambition of mine when I moved from London to Australia 2 years ago. I always regretted not doing more of the stuff in London. I think the problem with a big city, maybe like a big organization, thinking it back to our last question, is stuff's going on, so it's easy not to go to it and engage with things because it's like, it's over there. Some other people will kind of like do it. So when I moved, I was really keen to get more engaged. I think so. I volunteer in that interesting way that the Atlassian community kind of generates opportunities. So I volunteer as an Atlassian community co-lead for Mianjin, Brisbane, where I am, and that's really really lovely as an opportunity to create things that are like related to my work, but it's not for my work. It's there's a Venn diagram kind of relationship with things. We do a whole bunch of stuff. So I guess our biggest kind of jazziest one is that we run a annual unconference, as we like to call it, called Agile in Wonderland every March. This will be our third year of doing that, and it went from year one where it was like 60 people. And in my city, we got to 130 this year, which was not entirely our kind of plan, but it was a lovely challenge. And we'll be doing that in Sydney and Melbourne as well. And I think what I really love about those is that I think we're now beyond that initial kind of like, oh, we're not locked down anymore. It's nice to be back in person thing. And people are keen to make the most of those kind of physical spaces in a way that's intentional. So getting 130 people together and presenting slides at them is not a great use of time and energy, in my humble opinion. And so I really enjoy the opportunity to use people being physically together as a prompt to create something fun and chaotic and engaging. We did an event recently in Brisbane at the IABA's Festival of Business and Analysis, and we did massive balloon modelling, bouncing off Atlassian intelligence and Rovo capabilities to look at how product management might change in future. And seeing 80 people get excited and popping balloons and making Olympic stadiums from kind of like various inflatable things was awesome. And I really enjoy that kind of opportunity to do something whilst getting them excited about technology and what it can do for them. Yeah.
What is the main difference or benefit that you'd see from attending an in-person event? Because a lot of those people that are interested in Atlassian or maybe customers or want to know more, they're going on, live webinars, virtual events? What's the like biggest benefit of being there in person?
I think that you can learn from each other in that real micro way. And I've seen loads of platforms try to mimic that with various online interfaces where you can kind of sneak up virtually next to someone and have a chat. But there's something inherently, at least for now, that's about that personal thing. And I always try and build into our workshops and events an element where we break you out and have you with 5 people at your table doing something and talking about it. And I'm a big fan around teaching from the back of the room, and the six trumps as they have as part of that. And the premise of like learning through doing and learning through talking rather than me as some sort of omnipresent narrator at the front knowing everything and telling you that, I think is a big difference and something that I see as still a strength, at least for now, of physical events. Because you're right, you could say that for loads of webinars and exciting things, but if you're bothering to be in a room together with people, I feel like you want a bit of both, where it's like, yeah, you probably want to hear from someone who's talking about some informed pseudo expert opinion at the front, but then you kind of want to talk to the person next to you and understand, like, what did they think about what just got said, and like what have they brought with them to things, and maybe experiment and have some fun together.
Yeah, the networking aspect is definitely hard to achieve in a virtual environment. Even, I know what you're talking about, those little apps where you can kind of walk up to someone, talk, or have an individual room, but yeah, it's still not quite the same. And I do get what you're saying in terms of like the networking aspect.
Yeah, networking and learning together, I guess. Networking's a funny term that we've evolved to like cover. I think I'm really interested in how we educate adults out of play, and like building kind of safe space to experiment. And I feel like networking, a little bit like exercise and things, they're terms that we've used to cover up the fact that people like to play and have fun with other humans. And so we've given them terms that are a bit safer for a business context. Yeah. So, but look at everyone going down doing CrossFit around the corner and compare that to like a bunch of kids in a playground at school. It's basically the same thing, but they've called it something that makes it feel a bit more grown up when you kind of like term it.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. You mentioned Atlassian Intelligence in Rovo. Um, I know you're a big believer in AI. I have my doubts, so I'd love to be convinced otherwise of, I guess, where we are today. I don't have my doubts in terms of long-term AI. I think it's very cool and very valuable to our work uh, down the road. But today, let's take Atlassian Intelligence Rovo as an example. There are a few things it can do for you, but most of what it is what most people call like a Chat GPT wrapper, right? It's Chat GPT, but with some extra code on it. Um, so I'd love to be convinced otherwise of how it's super useful today and how it could save so much time for a lot of teams.
Yeah, and I did a Gen AI workshop with two 11-year-old or an 11-year-old and a 12-year-old yesterday because we were trying some stuff out, that we'd like to do with some larger groups. And I picked up Henrik Nyberg's AI in a Nutshell video, to refresh myself of some kind of key messages at the beginning, which if your viewers or listeners haven't watched, like definitely watch. It's an amazing video. And he describes a spectrum of attitudes to AI, where at one end of the scale, you've got the people who are sort of in denial. And I see a lot of this in organizations where they're like, no AI. Like that's their policy around things. And they're like, no, in denial, too busy, can't even think about that. That's a future thing. We're busy installing SAP or something in our kind of world. And at the other end of the scale, you've got the other sort of negativity, which is like a bit closer to you, well, maybe not you, but like the AI is going to take my jobs brigade, or the sort of the panic, Skynet takeover thing. And in the middle, you've got the potential for this sort of positive optimism of like AI and us together can work to do things. I think specifically looking at Atlassian Intelligence and Rovo, and I think it's important to separate them out a little bit, at least in their current incarnation. So for anyone that hasn't been through things, so Atlassian Intelligence, I think is quite close to what you're describing in some ways, and it's like in context Chat GPT, and in fact it's using bits of OpenAI in some areas, for stuff like when you're doing a Confluence page, help clean the text, pull in information and do things there. Whereas Rovo is that chat-based agent, separate product kind of interface, and is priced separately as things. Now, I think both have a strength, and what I'm excited about in answer to your question around. So you could just go to GPT and put in your question, or say, draft me this article and do things there. But it's really about having the organizational context and the information about your organization specifically that makes it exciting. And that's true of some other AI products like Copilot as well. But I guess when you're within the Atlassian stack and kind of wall garden of things, Rovo and Atlassian Intelligence both having that understanding of what Confluence is and what Jira is and how the data is structured, and bringing that opinion to what you're doing, I think is really exciting. And I'll give you one example from a workshop we're developing at the moment where we do a load of sticky noting physically in this case because we're in person and doing some things. We scan it and bring it into Confluence page. We use Atlassian Intelligence to tidy up, which is quite cool in itself. But then you end up with this list of like actions or ideas for doing things. And then the really exciting thing I found is that talking to Rovo or just using Atlassian Intelligence, you can say like, who in my organization should own these actions? And it's like, as a person, we spoke about everyone being in teams of 5 or 10 people or something. I don't know, like I personally work in an organization of 750,000. That's probably at the larger end of things. But even if you're in an organization of 7,500, you probably don't know like who are the best people to own things in your organization. But Atlassian Intelligence and Rovo, by harnessing the teamwork graph and all the data in your Atlassian tools and the other things you can connect to them, because you can connect Rovo into other systems as well, it can go and go, hey, well, Kit didn't know that Josh is the master of designing socks in the organization, but they generated this idea for a brand new woolen-based branding thing. Hey, Josh has been merrily working on this sock initiative over here for 6 months. Let's connect those things. And I think having that organizational specific knowledge and having that data in a place that you presumably opted into being safe, right? Because you're in Atlassian Cloud, if you're asking this question, I think that's really exciting. And it's that organizational context. I'm sure we're going to see more and more products and services where it's about having that specific tailored information to you in a space. But I think Atlassian Intelligence and Rovo are quite far ahead on it being usable and immediate to you at the moment. And it gives you really exciting potential when you do things like hook that into automation. So I'm doing something at the moment where we hook together Confluence automation so that you can go, give me some ideas to fix these problems. You click the button, it'll churn out Jira product discovery ideas for you. And like that's harnessing together in a really easy to use UI driven way some of those kind of components. And it's pretty like early days, right? So in 6 or 12 months, I'm sure it's going to be really exciting what we can see those things evolve into. And we just don't know, right? Anyone who pretends to be some sort of Gen AI guru who can like, lead you on a journey and that they know everything, they're lying, right? Like, sure, some people are further ahead than others, although in most cases I find it's just the people who are happy to play more. It's the people who disappear into a Gen AI rabbit hole on Friday morning and find out Sora's new capabilities and do things there. But we're all learning at the moment. So you can be like half a step ahead, but you can't be years ahead in a technology that's still evolving the whole time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are great examples that you brought up, and I'm not denying that AI isn't useful today. I'm more coming in as a skeptic from a business perspective, right? So say I'm an organization owner, I have 100 employees, right? And this new product gets announced, Rovo, and I'm like, okay, great, like this would be really cool to use. And then I'm like, whoa, that price is pretty expensive because we have to purchase the license for every single employee in our organization. So there's really no limit to one user or two users. Like if I just wanted to use it, if you're purchasing for everyone. I think that's kind of the biggest downfall. But kind of coming back to the value and the skepticisms that I have, it's more of a, does the price, outweigh the reward? So am I actually getting enough value from it at its current price point to justify paying that much for our organization to have Rovo? And I think most of the time when I've talked to teams and I've used Rovo and demoed Rovo, the answer is kind of no, but it's close. So I'm a big believer in like, okay, we're getting there, and we're maybe a year or two away from having that be like a solid 100% yes. But I think for a lot of organizations, we're still in that kind of a maybe, or like sometimes, but not all the time.
Yeah, I think I've got two answers that spring to mind on it. The first is like, it's just frightening how little you need to do with it to pay back. Now, I know how willing we are as humans to not pay for tools and waste people's time instead. And like people seem to have, an organization seems to have this black spot for like not calculating the cost of those people's time. They're willing to spend loads of time on people faffing around with slides and moving information around before they'll even trial a tool or kind of buy a tool. But I think the stats from a fairly recent Atlassian report I saw were that most organizations making use of their AI-based capabilities are saving like 2 hours a week per person. And it's like, just calculate that cost for your organization, even if you average it out or be slightly conservative, and you will really, really quickly pay for the capabilities, even as they stand now amongst things, several fold over. And I think very few people really do that calculation and honestly weigh up the cost versus other. So I think that's one end of it. The other thing for me is, though, that I think a lot of people will just kind of install tools and then hope that people do some magic with them. And I think having a strategy and actually investing in a team of enablers to do things and make sure you get the value out is where the savvy people are doing. I worked with an organization in Brisbane recently, and one of their team, who was one of the Agile coaches, has just moved into an AI manager role. And it's basically because he's a massive geek. He's been experimenting and doing things, and he's great at then sharing that capability building with the others. So the value that an organization that builds roles and people like that, where they're like, we're not just going to give you these tools and then leave you with them and hope that you do magic. We're actually going to recognize that it does take a special kind of person to build templates, enablers, educate and upskill so that you can get the most value. I think that's where you're going to see like the value coming out, because certainly at the moment, and probably forever, like it does take a bit of navigation, right? It takes a lot. And even just to make sure that the benefits kind of go across the organization to go, hey, your web development team over here did something really cool. Does the service management team over here know about it? And has someone helped them translate that AI use case and benefit into something that works for them? Now, maybe in a year or two time, the AI will do that. It'll go, hey, Josh, didn't you know yesterday that Bill in web development did this cool thing? But at the moment, there's still a role for human ambassadors and enablers across an organization to do that. It's the same as in team topologies, which I don't know if you've read. There's a team type called enabler, who basically run ahead and provide templates and enablers. And I think organizations who want to get the return on value from their AI investment, whether it's Rovo or anything else, they need to invest in an AI enabler team to run ahead and provide that capability acceleration.
Yeah, and that kind of, I think, presents another challenge where number one, it's kind of more effort and more of your it's more commitment, right? If you're implementing AI into your organization, to not only implement the AI and pay for it and expect the team to use it, we also have to bring in someone who's going to enable it and actually push it forward. And again, I think it works great for a lot of teams, but then there's a lot of organizations that I've worked with where you have like maybe 50% of the employees that hardly know how to use a computer, so they're very likely not going to end up using AI in their typical workflow. So I feel like that's where it's very tough to implement something like that, because you're paying for everyone in the organization, so you're assuming that it's going to save X amount of time per employee. But if you're 50 to 70% of your workforce is maybe not going to end up using it on a daily basis, the value just goes way down. Again, that's not the case for all organizations. I think there's quite a bit of them, especially more hands-on organizations or organizations where there's a lot of more older people in that organization. It's a little bit harder to push new technology in general. But yeah, I think that's one of the bigger pain points that I've seen, and the hesitations that I've seen from organizations that I've pitched it to in the past.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be homogenous, right? Is I think what we're saying. You're going to need to appreciate that these tools are going to provide different kinds of value and different use cases for different people. Now, I think that's part of the power with a lot of the AI-based products that we're seeing, in that they have an element of genericism, or like at least kind of multiple users. I'm a big fan of the specialist ones as well. I love things where they just do that. And you can see that that's useful for a kind of smaller population. But the more general things, I think we need to be okay with the fact that some people will use stuff just to have more fun at work. Some people will use it to build self-service tools for their customers. And I think having things where you can build that flex is interesting. Rovo is an interesting example of that, because with the custom agent capability, you can have everything from like a fairly non-technical user, like building their own agent. One of my favorite use cases recently is building an out of office cover robot. So I did this recently with my colleague Matt, where we just had I recorded actually on Riverside. I recorded having a chat with him about his holiday plans. We just fed the transcript into a wiki page, and then we built a Rovo agent that will cover for him. And like, it's not going to obviously replace him just yet. Maybe in 12 months it'll kind of do that. But it was able to have a more nuanced discussion with people who were looking for him when he was at the office to make the information accessible to them. I think that's a really kind of easy use case. But at the same time, you might have something really technical. Like one of my favorite demos from Jensen, the Rovo product owner over here in ANZ, is a knowledge librarian, where it's like every time a ticket gets closed, uh, Rovo checks whether you've got a troubleshooting or information page about the new feature. If not, it'll draft one for you and then put it in your backlog with things. And it's like, yeah, not every team's going to implement something like that or have a use for that kind of scenario. But that's the same tool between those two. And if you want to get super techy, you could code your own as well. So having things where you've got that breadth, I think, is really exciting.
Yeah, I think those use cases are like straight up, like any team you bring that to, they're gonna be like, that's a ton of value for us. We see 100%, it's worth it. Anything that performs in action, I think, creating Confluence documents, some of the third-party integrations that are coming out from vendors, I think are really, really good as well. But ultimately, where it's going is I feel like, again, more of the action from the AI, and it's more so a teammate than just a knowledge transfer tool. I think that's when it gets super useful. But I'm curious if do you use like ChatGPT at all, or are you pretty much all Atlassian Intelligence right now?
I use everything I can get my hands on, Josh. So, like on a day-to-day basis, I'm using ChatGPT, Rovo, and Atlassian Intelligence. I'm a big fan of Perplexity, which I don't know if you've used with things.
I used it. Yep.
Yeah, especially when I'm a bit cynical and I want to be really sure I can see that where the source of the facts are. I always use Perplexity. I still have that element of distrust, even though ChatGPT is like much better at citation now. And then my favorite one that I'm using lots with people at the moment is Napkin.ai, which does diagramming and visualization of things. And I think that's an example of a specialist one where it's like for a very specific use case. Yeah, big use of ChatGPT to answer your specific question.
Yeah. I'm curious because I'm a pretty heavy ChatGPT user, and mostly for like the text and like making things sound and look a little bit better most of the time, from emails to documentation. But I find that it's harder for me to get what I want with Atlassian Intelligence than just going to ChatGPT directly, giving it a set of instructions and then a couple of follow-ups, and then I got exactly what I want. And I feel like Atlassian Intelligence lacks that ability to kind of get me exactly what I'm looking for in a way. I don't know if you've experienced the same thing or not, or maybe I'm using it wrong, or maybe my requirements are different. But I'm curious if you've kind of had the same experience.
I think it's fair, and it's interesting, right? Where there's a core set of models that everyone's anchoring off, right? And I know Mark Zuckerberg's very keen that there's Llama at the root of things, not ChatGPT, or not OpenAI, but a lot of people are using the OpenAI APIs. I definitely think that as people put products on top of those APIs, they're layering in not only the dependencies on their technology, which is going to be slower, I guess, than the people who are closest to things, but also like their opinions to some extent around like how that interface works, and that can bring good things like the organizational intelligence things, and it can bring like some nuances which maybe it's people like us who are like living on all the tools where you're like, I just know it's going to be amazing from ChatGPT, and you're kind of used to that prompt engineering interface where having the difference is kind of there. But I have definitely noticed some areas where you get like different answers. I feel like it's often like the more generic stuff as well, like the stuff in context. The Atlassian product layer is really, really great for bringing on. Um, I asked something under there. I think I was trying to translate a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reference into binary code for a bad joke in the office, and going via ChatGPT was better at it. Now, how critical is that as a use case to most people's organization? Probably not right up there, but it definitely was a better answer for what I'd intended directly via the ChatGPT interface in those ways. So I feel like at the moment we're still at that stage where, like, if you're someone who's happy to try lots of things and experiment, you're going to get the best result out at the end for where you're at. Maybe right back to that like role of having like an enabler squad in your organization, where like when people are like, how am I going to get the best visual, Josh? And like knowing that for a background for a presentation, you want them to go to DALI rather than Bing or something. Like there's a role to navigate those tools still, at least for the moment.
Yeah, well, I'm glad I'm not the only one that kind of sees that difference. But yeah, even you mentioned Perplexity and other tools. I feel like they're all slightly different and unique in their own way and put their own spin on things. So I just tend to use ChatGPT 4, and maybe it's just the fact that I know how to use it better now. It's just getting me better results. But I'm very like, I'm very, what's the word? I'm very abrupt with AI. I'm just like, hey, give me this, and like super vague, super quick. I just want the result as quick as possible. I don't want to provide any context, and just get the feedback as quick as I possibly can without wasting my time on it.
Yeah, I mean, but you're meant to be polite with it in case the revolution comes and the
That's what
robots
everyone
hold the
says.
grudge.
Yeah.
So you should always say please and thank you when you're addressing ChatGPT or Alexa.
Funny thing is, I always like anytime I prompt, I misspell everything. I like it's just the worst thing I could possibly write, but it always understands, which is amazing because then I could move way quicker. But yeah, it's hard to give more context because I the whole point of using the tool is to get something quicker and save some of my time. So I tend to not really provide as much information as I maybe should. But yeah, it tends to give me results quicker, and is what I'm looking for is really to save my time. So usually it
Mm.
ends up working.
The bit I like, and this is maybe not great practice, is like how I can use it to context switch and multitask like my human brain can't. So it's like I got into the office this morning after cycling in, and I was like, I need to work out which of the insanely long item list my kids are asking for Christmas is actually affordable for me to kind of do. So I just shoved the screen grab of their Christmas list into ChatGPT, said, please go and find me the prices for 3 stores. And then I went off my shower, and it was like in the 30 seconds or so that it took to churn through the things, I was going to have my shower and do other things, and then I was able to come back to it. And it's like, there's no way I would effectively do those things in parallel as a human. Now, I could go and do that task around things. It was definitely quicker overall, but also just the ability to delegate it relatively effectively to an AI and then run the two things in parallel was really effective.
Yeah, I kind of do the same thing where I'll just throw something in there, let it do its thing, go work on something for a few seconds. Or if it's like the O4 model and it takes a minute to process or whatever, I'll just go do something else and let it run. And yeah, it is nice to have it just kind of working for you, and it's kind of like your little personal assistant. Definitely pretty cool to have. I'm curious what your day to day might look like within the Atlassian suite. Are you using it pretty often within your role and within your job?
Yeah, and I hop and skip between different stacks and suites. So we use the Atlassian suite for our community and practices within the company. So we have the Accenture Guide to the Galaxy is my confluence space that we use for us to communicate and curate our knowledge internally, which is super cool. We've been trying out Rovo and Atlassian Intelligence there to kind of help users interact with it. So we do use things within the organization. Um, and then with clients, we'll hop between their different kind of stacks depending on what we're doing. And I've got a sort of weird role by most people's standards is that in that I'm often across multiple organizations at any one time helping my teams and them doing things. So I have to jump between like people who are at different stages of cloud adoption and with different tiers of products, and some folks who are still on DC. I don't have anyone that I see regularly where they're still on server, so that one has properly died with the end of life. It feels like, but you still see some organizations where they're on DC behind multiple firewalls. It's a pain just to get in, and I really feel like those folk where the user experience of getting into the tools is awful. I feel like they're really missing the value versus an organization where you're like, hey, I'm just in the cloud. It's like pretty quick. I can kind of get in there. Whether you've got AI on or not, I think having that level of immediacy and the sort of user experience that we're all used to now with I have an expectation of a web-based tool where I can get into it with like 2 clicks, preferably don't even enter my password because I've got it with some nice authenticator. And it really makes it jarring when I have to go back and log in via a VM and my mouse moves slowly across the screen and you have that sort of capability. So bit of a mix of product stacks and kind of access.
Hmm. More of a like future question, but where do you think Atlassian's kind of headed as a company and the changes that they're making, new companies that they're acquiring? Where do you see them in 5 to 10 years from now?
It's interesting. Like sometimes when they do the acquisitions, I'm a bit like, huh? Like so, like Loom, I was a bit like, huh, around, but I'm now seeing like the kind of magic with things. So maybe I need to have a bit more faith when things come in that I don't understand. Um, I think them pivoting more to the system of work narrative is sensible, and it's what like if you've been a solution partner like we are, like you always talk in terms of like the work and the solution and the use scenarios, not the individual tool licenses anyway. So I think that's very savvy and reflects like how real humans like to use their stuff. So I think seeing that context is really important, and as part of that, people not considering the individual tools as much and about that platform is really really important. Um, and understanding that it's not a great idea to just buy Jira and then faff around with SharePoint for your Microsoft Word documents, but going like, hey, there's a lot of power for me having that connectivity of Confluence plus Jira plus Compass or something in those kind of worlds. So I think we'll see even more of that platformy kind of feel around things where it's about going in there. I feel like we haven't really got yet to the maturity of the different tiers kind of matching up with that. So I feel like in the future, it will be more like kind of like you're buying enterprise Atlassian and you don't care or know maybe what products are underneath that, but you're getting access to a range of functionality and platform experiences that are appropriate for that scale of organization around things. So I feel like we're heading in that kind of direction. It's funny as well where you see like competitors. So like I think Jira is still the most common thing that I encounter for people managing their work in sort of organizations I work with. Azure DevOps probably second, and the UX of ADO feels quite far behind at the moment. But I'm sure Microsoft, with their bundles of cash and interesting capabilities, will kind of fix that soon. But things like Confluence, I very rarely encounter competitors for. So I think it'll be interesting whether that changes in the next few years. And I know people are big fans of Notion and other areas there. So I think it'd be interesting to see what combo of things is a sort of competitive choice for Atlassian in 6 months or 12 months, especially with AI factored in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm a big fan of how Notion just has one product and everything is there. You could manage your projects, you could document, you could integrate other tools, you can store files. It's kind of like a Jira Confluence wrapped into one, but not as robust and powerful or customizable. But it is a very like sleek, quick, comfortable tool. So if you're like a smaller organization, I could definitely see the appeal of Notion. But I'm curious if you think maybe that there's a point in the future where Atlassian might bundle those because pricing is a big thing right now for a lot of organizations, right? It's the prices are going up pretty consistently. The products, are evolving. There's more of them, so you have to pay for more products. You have to pay more for each product. So do you ever think there's a world where you just get a bundle of Atlassian apps for one flat price?
I think for sure. I mean, because they already tried it, right? There's the Atlassian. I think it's Atlassian Together. I'll Google in the background, but
I've
they
never
did
heard
a
of that.
bundling of. Let me check that I'm not doing things in the background, but there was a bit of a bundling experiment, um, and I think it was Confluence, Trello. Yeah, there you go. Atlassian Together licensing. I'm not imagining it, Josh. So yeah, Confluence, Trello, Jira Work Management, and Atlas. Now I haven't looked at what that translates to in our new world of things where you got just Jira and things like that. They're already one experiment. I have no idea how that went from an adoption perspective around things, but I feel like between what both of us are saying, yes, probably. It feels like if you got like that sort of more personally orientated one, because it's definitely like that Trello kind of like angle. Jira Work Management definitely feels it's like you and your marketing team. I can definitely see a reality where it'd be sensible for us to have more of those bundles where it's about, I don't know, Atlassian engineer, and you get Jira and Confluence and Compass together, like for that kind of bundle of things. And maybe in an organization, you'd have different kind of bundles for your personas and teams, or something like that. Would be really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of one thing I've been wishing for. It gets a little messy paying for Confluence, and then you're paying for Jira, and then you're also paying for Jira Service Management. Now you have Loom. So many products. You used to have Atlas. Thankfully, that's Atlassian Home now, so no licensing there. But yeah, it gets confusing and pretty pricey after a while. And it'd be nice to just say, hey, here's what you need. Just buy this. It's one price. That's what you get.
Yeah, it's funny with the pricing though, because I always find like people, what it appears pricey, and you're not wrong about price increases if you're like a diehard Jira server geek who used to buy a perpetual license to do things there. But I still feel that if you look across the landscape at like other enterprise products, particularly that are out there, it's still relatively cheap. and good value, perhaps more than kind of cheapness around things. Going
Yeah, I
back to
think
that sort of like 2 hours kind of
enterprise,
days a week.
yeah, you're right. It is on the lower end of enterprise, but from a small business perspective, it does tend to be skewed higher than most other solutions, which is, a lot of teams we work with are a little bit smaller, maybe 10 to a few hundred, maybe sometimes a few thousand employees. So yeah, it tends to be a little bit more expensive for some of those teams in some cases.
Mm. We'll have to see how the bundling thing plays out, if indeed it does play out, right? I guess the other flip side of that is more and more of the things people have had to buy apps for are now like at least a usable level coming into those native capabilities. So things like whiteboards. I mean, now Confluence whiteboards to my mind isn't a replacement for like power users of Miro and Mural and those kind of similar things. But for people who just want to do like a team retro or like basic kind of collaboration things, they're great. They're really good. So I think looking at your total suite of things and then how much those Atlassian capabilities at their core can provide to you is that if indeed people have the time to kind of like go and calculate ownership, right? 'Cause we're all very willing to calculate the cost of the tools, but not to look at the other stuff as we spoke about earlier.
Yeah, I kind of get the same thing from whiteboards. I probably wouldn't pay for Miro, but now that I have Confluence whiteboards, I use them from time to time, and it's pretty great to just have that available as an option within your Confluence suite. Thankfully, it's not an extra price, so you kind of just use it whenever you have an opportunity. But if it was an extra price, I wouldn't be able to justify it because I maybe create a whiteboard once a month or so. So it's just not too common.
Yeah. Have you played with the AI capabilities in the whiteboards yet?
No, I haven't. That's one thing I wanted to try out because the one big thing for me was you have the whiteboard, you have all the information, but pulling that over to somewhere in Confluence or Jira tasks, that takes time, and I feel like I'd rather just do it in Confluence or Jira right away. But if you have the ability, and I've seen some of those actions where you could just highlight something, throw it into Jira task, convert something to a Confluence doc, I think the real power is, or the real usability for a whiteboard for me is going to be in those AI actions.
Yeah, and I don't think you're wrong in that kind of closeness to the other tools. So like, because it's a bit like if we were physically whiteboarding, you'd want to be able to move the sticky note over to your board that your team was working on elsewhere, and it is just so frighteningly easy to right click and turn it into a Jira ticket, or whatever we're calling the tickets now. We're not calling them issues anymore, right?
Work
We're calling
items or something.
work items or wherever it's at. But that closeness is really important.
Mhm.
I feel like at the moment the AI smarts are mainly coming in very nice things like being able to summarize or kind of cluster and group. We're seeing a lot of those in various whiteboarding tools. I think the next stage where Rovo and Atlassian Intelligence are querying the contents of whiteboards really transparently as part of things, I think would be really cool. It might even be live now. I haven't checked, to be honest with you, but like be able to draw that comparison and go like, hey, you just done a sticky note on that retroaction. Did you know this other team's already solved it? Like, I think there's some really nice immediate scenarios where you can see that starting to become useful.
Mhm. Yeah, it always kind of makes me wonder how useful these things are, right? A whiteboard, if you think about it, it's a physical thing, turns into a digital thing. So we're kind of just replicating the physical into the digital. But in my mind, I think about it, is it really the most effective way to do it? And you kind of see these companies deviating off of, standard stuff from a typical whiteboard and doing something more unique. But in my mind, it's like, is it really the most efficient way to do it on a computer? Because physically, it's something very different from something you do digitally.
Yeah, I mean, we all carry these kind of UX hangovers with us from things, right? And I was speaking to one of my nephews the other week, and we were talking about how, as someone now in their late 30s, when I first encountered Snapchat, I couldn't get the UX. Like, is it like that first generation of mobile apps where they're designed for folks in my age demographic? And it was like you have a clear understanding of what the navigation is going to be like in a typical app, right? There's a few patterns, but it's basically kind of there. And in your social media app, you're going to have like a feed and like a hamburger menu and things there. And Snapchat's just weird. Opening directly into the camera, I don't even know if it does that anymore because I never got into using it with things. It was a very different kind of UX dynamic. And I feel like you're right in that the dynamic of interaction with these tools currently is based on what a certain generation of tech folk and business people kind of use and get used to. And like, is that the most optimal? Probably not. It's a bit like the QWERTY keyboard, where it's like, why are we still using a QWERTY keyboard defined by the mechanics of a typewriter that no one's used in a mechanical sense for like 70 years now? And so,
Used to
how
it,
much
yep.
like, yeah, it's crazy, right? So, I definitely with you. how you could like move over that dynamic because of the slowness of humans to adapt, I think is really challenging. And in fact, I think the whole agent interface model that is what everyone's doing this year. I, I have a feeling like that's kind of one of those, in that I get that people find it really immediate and interesting now. I feel like the sort of agentless, the AI goes and just does things in the future kind of model is
Yeah.
going to be way more where it's at. I feel like the agent interface thing is like a temporary blip in how we work with AIs, that reflects what we need as humans more than what's optimal.
Yeah, that's a great point because we want to associate what the AI is doing to what we could be doing, right? Or to what a teammate could be doing. And it's kind of like bridging the gap between the future and what we have right now. And ultimately, it's probably not ideal and it's slower, but it helps us to conceptualize and actually visualize what is possible and what is being done. But yeah, it's like the same thing as handing a kid an iPad and he already knows how to do everything, right? There's no questions about where all the buttons are and how everything works. It's just instant. Whereas you hand someone who's never used an iPad, who's older, it's totally different world. So yeah, you're totally right, and I'm guessing within 20 years from now, we're going to be like, what were these agents for? What was the point of this? Why couldn't they just do it without the agent? And would have saved so much time. But yeah, for today, we're trying to conceptualize what it actually is going to do and how it's actually going to act for us.
Yeah, but I think it's a necessary kind of transitional step. But I mean, like fundamentally, in my head, I sort of understand it. I sort of want there to be like a little robot the other side that's kind of doing it individually, like a kind of Richard Scarry kind of kid's illustration of things. And that's just a hangover of my limitations as a human and my kind of era of stuff. I think we naturally, as humans, want to anthropomorphize. I'm going to make up my words. We want to make it like a little kind of animal or robot or person or character is doing the things for us, because that's a dynamic that works in our heads, right? And I don't think like that's by any means necessarily the most efficient and effective way for these technologies to be leveraged. But we need those stepping stones for us to get there.
Yeah, that's definitely true. All right, Kit. Well, thanks so much for jumping on and talking AI and hearing me out and my perspectives. It's been great having you on. And if someone wants to reach out to you about an event or joining some virtual event, how can they find you or reach you?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn. I think there's only two Kit friends, and the other one's in the Malaysian car mechanic. So you'll quite easily distinguish between the two of us.
Can
You can
mechanic have a
find
LinkedIn?
Uh, I think he was at some point. I need to like message him or to catch up. He was
Oh,
definitely on Facebook. So yeah, maybe the only
yeah.
Kit friend on
Anytime
LinkedIn.
I search for a mechanic, I always make sure they have a LinkedIn first.
Yeah, yeah. So LinkedIn, not the car mechanic, Medium, or you can find me via the Atlassian Brisbane community. So ace.atlassian.com/Brisbane. And yeah, happy to chat on all channels and all topics, Atlassian, Agile, all those kind of things.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being here. Appreciate your time.